we're going to discuss a few items that are going to be on the final. It won't take very long, but if you pay attention, it should be very straightforward. First of all, if we take a look at this drawing right here, you can see that I have 5 lines and 4 spaces. We've covered it before. You know it as the staff. Do not forget it. Be prepared for any way that it might be worded, either asking you to define it or asking you to provide the name for the definition. Another thing you're going to need to know are the different kinds of clefs that we use in music. Should be very familiar with this one, the treble clef. Generally used for high instruments and voices. If we're talking choir, that's where we're going to have our sopranos and our altos singing. Now, if we're talking about low instruments or voices, we're going to be using the bass clef. Let me write that in there real quick. Bada boom. And yeah, that would be our tenors and our basses that'd be singing in this clef. Now, if I take both of these clefs, the bass clef and the treble clef, and I brace them together, here's my brace, I'm going to refer to that as the grand staff. Now, your staff, if you're a soprano, alto, tenor, or bass, it's not going to be a grand staff because we're focusing on your staff. However, any music that has a piano accompaniment, you'll notice that the staff has this brace, making it a grand staff. Keep that in mind. You'll be totally fine. I want you to be extremely comfortable with notes and rests, recognizing them, knowing their names, knowing the associated number of beats. So let's get started with notes. Remember that our largest note is going to be the whole note, correct? Generally speaking, it's going to get 4 beats, okay? If I add a stem to that, I'm going to have the half note. That's going to get 2 beats. Fill it in, quarter note. That gets 1 beat. And one of the other notes that you're going to have to know is going to be the 8th note. That gets half a beat. Okay? Now, for every type of note which produces sound, there's going to be an equivalent rest that has the same number of beats, but they are silent. If you remember, our whole rest kind of looks like a hole in the ground. The half rest looks like a hat, maybe a top hat. The quarter rest looks kind of like a Z with a C. And the 8th rest has a flag, just like the 8th note does. So they look very similar to each other. Take a look at that. Study as much as you need to. It helps to draw them, so give that a try if you need to. Time signatures are not extremely difficult if you relate it to math. Now, sometimes when you bring up the word math, scary thoughts come to mind, having to go through geometry proofs and prove something that we already know is true, or imaginary numbers and so on and so forth. Fortunately for us, it just involves fractions. Time signatures are made up of 2 numbers, one over another. This is a common one we see a lot. We also see this one a lot. We see this a lot. And we also see this. I believe we've seen all of these in a semester. Now, what I want you to be able to recognize is what the top number means and the bottom number means. Simply, the top number is going to answer the question, how many? And then the bottom number is going to answer the question of what? So just think to yourself, top number, how many of the bottom number. And this is going to be how many notes? It's going to be what kind of note. Let's move on for a second. It'll become clear in a moment. Let's take a look at 3/4 time. If I turn it into a fraction, I could break down 3/4 into 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4. Now you may be asking yourself, why would you break down a perfectly good fraction into more fractions? Well, it's because of the terminology. If I take a look at this fraction right here, 1/4, the alternative name for it is a quarter, and we have a type of note that we call a quarter note, which we've already talked about in detail on many occasions. And if I replace this quarter with a quarter note, then I have answered the question of how many and of what. So I have 3 quarters, or I could say that I have 3 quarter notes, and then it works out perfectly. If I had 4/4 time, that would simply be referring to 4 quarter notes. And it doesn't matter what this number is. If this number is a 4, we know it's referring to quarter notes. So it could say 10/4, and we would be referring to 10 quarters or 10 quarter notes. Now take a look at this. 6/8 time. If I think about it in fractions, I am going to have 6/8 notes. So my unit that I'm talking about on bottom is the 8th note. So there are 6/8 notes in 6/8 time. Or if I was in 12/8 time, that would be 12/8 notes. The ones that I want you to be worried about for your final are going to be 3/4 time, 4/4 time, 6/8 time, and 12/8 time. All you need to know is that the 8 refers to 8th notes, the 4 refers to quarters, and then that top number, whatever it is going to tell you how many of that note there are in each measure. Dynamics are going to be a concern for us because we've been using them all semester to help us perform our music more accurately, more musically. They're very important. As I've mentioned before, I'm not going to make you spell them, but I will have you define them, list the name from the abbreviation. Very simple tasks if you've been paying attention. Now I'm going to list my louder dynamics up here. I'm going to list my softer dynamics down here. From soft to loud, my dynamics end up being piano, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and then forte. We do have a couple that are extreme. For instance, sometimes we have the fortissimo up here and the pianissimo down here. But for a bulk of our music, we've pretty much only been using these. That's what I'm going to worry about. Abbreviation-wise, forte is F, mezzo forte MF, very straightforward, mezzo piano MP, and then piano just a P. There may be a question on the final where you're asked to arrange these dynamics in order from maybe softest to loudest or loudest to softest. It's up to you. I'll jumble them up and you need to choose the correct order based on the question that I ask. Take a look at them, make yourself familiar with them. Just remember, piano soft, forte strong or loud, you'll be just fine. There are a few items that can be drawn on the staff that I want you to be aware of. We've talked about them, we deal with them a lot, so I want you to be able to identify them at any given point in time. For instance, what I'm drawing on either side of this empty staff here, you'll hopefully remember, are called bar lines. You should also remember from class that the unit that is created by the bar lines is called the measure. Make sure you don't mess with the two. You have to have bar lines to divide the music, those divided pieces of staff become measures. So if you remember, in our music often we had boxes with measure numbers in them that go over the bar line, but they tell us what number of measure we are in the piece of music. Be aware of that and you should be good to go. Now if I come down here to this staff, a different type of bar line that we often have is the repeat sign, which is 2 lines, 2 bar lines, and 2 dots. And you're always going to repeat the music that is in the direction the dots are pointing. So these dots are kind of pointing this way, these dots are pointing this way. That is the music you would repeat. Now let's talk about solfege while we're on this staff right here. I'm going to draw a treble clef, and then I am going to draw a series of notes. Let's say these notes here. The question on the final may be worded as such. If this note is fa, then what are the next 2 notes? Well, we know that we're going from a space to a line in a step, and then from a line to a space and a step. So in order, we just need to think do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which would make this note so, and this note la. The question may ask you to identify it on the staff. The question might say what comes after so, which is la, or what comes before do, which is ti. And it's up to you to read the questions carefully so you can answer them appropriately. One of the last things I want to talk about is the first and second ending. We've seen them several times this semester. We'll be singing them in the future, so it's super important that we know how to recognize them and then also know what their function is. They're pretty easy to recognize because they have a 1 and a 2. If you saw this on a final and you had to pick the title from a list, hopefully the 1 and the 2 would lead you to the conclusion that this is a first and second ending. The repeat sign is also a clue because it's going to have us repeat some material. The function of it, if you remember, is we are performing. We get through to this repeat sign. It tells us to go back to the beginning or to the first repeat sign. Then, when we go through it again, and I approach this first ending, I've already done this material already. So I can just skip over it and take the second ending and then go on my merry way and finish the song. If you can understand that much of it, then you know how it works. It's that simple. Saves us time, saves us paper. It's a brilliant tool for music. This is a rundown of what the final is going to look like. Don't forget your basic parts of the staff. They're pretty important to know. This includes your clefs, the staff itself, the grand staff, the different voice parts, the different types of repeat signs. There may even be terms that are a little less familiar, but we've can still identify, such as ledger lines. Notes and rests are very important. You need to know the names. You need to know the number of beats. You need to be able to recognize them by sight. Time signatures, walk in the park. Top number tells you how many. Bottom number tells you what kind of note. Solfege is going to be our do, a deer, a female deer, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Dynamics, forte down to piano, very important to know. Any other items that may come up, I will tell you before the final actually gets here. There may be a couple things that have slipped my mind that we just need to cover briefly, but I think we should be good to go. If you need to go over this on your own, it's always available online. Please take the time to look at it if you do not feel comfortable with some areas of the final. Best luck to you. Hope that things go well. Peace out.